Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 6. I won't risk losing you again. Tally's words kept running through Sarah's mind long after the girl had left to go back to her coven. It had surprised Sarah how quickly and fervently Tally had agreed to not telling anyone, even going so far as to adamantly say that she wouldn't be telling her unit. That had surprised Sarah most of all. Raelle and Abigail were the two most important people in Tally's life. If she was willing to keep Sarah's existence a secret from her sisters, then perhaps I won't risk losing you again. Sarah shook the words from her mind as she crawled into bed. She couldn't very well spend the rest of her night thinking about Tally Craven and how her heart had pounded in her chest at Tally's words. It was almost juvenile, the way her heart had been racing. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. So long, she was struggling to remember when she had last felt such a sensation, if in fact, she realized in distress, she ever even had. She was trying not to think too hard about why it had happened now. If she spent too much time on thinking about why Tally Craven, promising to keep her secret, sent her heart racing, then she might start thinking about how seeing Tally Craven for the first time in months made her heart stop in her chest for a few seconds. And if she spent too much time thinking about that, then she would have to start thinking about why seeing Tally Craven crying had made her lose her control over her work. And she definitely wasn't going to think about that. Except, Sarah realized with a quiet groan, it was all she could think about. 1 second she had been terrified that she had made a mistake, and the entirety of the first-year cadet class was able to see her as they left the mess hall. But in the next, as Tally had tore her way through her classmates going the opposite direction, Sarah had quickly realized that no one could see her except for Tally. For some reason, that had scared her more than her first thought had. She had, and frankly still was, trying not to blame Raelle for the things she had said to Tally after they caught up with her. But hearing Kola yell, "She's dead," to Tally had been enough to bring about the first crack of thunder. And then Tally had started crying, and Sarah was frozen in place, at the mercy of her own storm, as she watched Raelle convince Tally that she was gone, truly gone. It was why she had asked Petra to let her see Tally, and Sarah was thankful that Petra had agreed, because if she hadn't, she would have found some way to tell Tally herself. Part of Sarah knew it was ridiculous. She was the former general of the United States Army, and here she was, catering to the needs and emotional well-being of one cadet. Granted, that cadet had risked her life for her before, when she had offered herself over as a biddy, but she was a cadet nonetheless. But the other part of Sarah, the part that would scream, "It's not just a cadet, it's Tally," whenever she saw her, the part that would lose control and create thunderstorms for her, the part that would risk being exposed to the world for her. That part of Sarah knew it didn't matter. No matter the rank, no matter the situation, Sarah Alder knew that she was never going to let Tally Craven suffer because of her again. "Adil, can I speak with you?" Tally was painfully aware of the shrillness in her voice, the stiffness of her body. Adil looked up at her with curiosity, mixed with concern. Beside him, Gregorio looked up at her, like she had just spoken in mother tongue. "You all right there, Craven?" Gregorio looked her up and down, eyebrows furrowed. "You seem a little tense." "I'm fine." Tally's voice, if possible, seemed to rise in shrillness. Adil glanced at Gregorio nervously, the other boy just staring at Tally, dumbfounded. Sure, Tally. What's up?" Tally's gaze flicked from Adil to Gregorio, then back to Adil. "In private?" Adil looked apologetically to Gregorio, who held his hands up. "Hey, no worries, man. Maybe one day we'll get through a study session without an interruption, huh?" Adil gave Gregorio a smile, and had barely stood up from the table before Tally turned on her heel and took off, leaving Adil to race after her. "Oh, when you said private, you really meant private," Adil murmured as he followed Tally into an empty classroom and watched her shut the door behind them. "I know about Alder," Tally blurted out before glancing round the room nervously, as if someone were hiding among the chairs and had heard her. A series of emotions crossed over Adil's face. Shock, confusion, and concern all flickered over his face before he seemed to settle on an impassive look. "There's nothing to know about Alder." "Adil!" Tally whisper-shouted his name, hugging her books to her chest. "I saw her. Like, I actually saw her and talked to her. I know she's alive." "You... what? But how?" "Petra let me see her." Tally was practically gushing. "Or maybe it was letting her see me. I don't really know what her motivation was, but that doesn't matter. She's alive, Adil, and I know you know too, which is why I'm telling you this, and not Abigail and Rael." "You're not going to tell Abigail and Rael?" "Adil!" Tally's whisper shout was closer to an actual shout this time. "We can't tell them. This is a secret for a reason." "No, I mean, I know, but—" "There are no buts," Tally interrupted Adil, looking more serious than he had ever seen her. "I don't like lying to my sisters, but this is all their safety we're dealing with here. Not to mention, she's like the secret weapon in our war against the Camarilla. This is way bigger than either of us. We can't tell anyone." Adil looked like he had more to say on the matter, but he instead sighed and shook his head. "Yeah, I guess you're right. I just don't like lying to Abigail." "Yeah," Tally said, her voice finally at a normal level. "That can't be fun, lying to the person you love." "It's not," Adil said seriously. But then his head tilted as he looked at Tally, and a small smile appeared on his face. "I am happy for you, though. I know how hard it was for you dealing with Alder's death. I'm glad it's something that you won't have to struggle with anymore." Tally beamed at Adil, and for a split second he faintly thought that she was going to cry out of sheer happiness. But then she shook her head and laughed awkwardly, the moment passing. "I'm just glad to know that I'm not going crazy. You know, with that working you taught Alder. Goddess, I really thought I was seeing things there for a little bit." She laughed awkwardly again, a little more forced this time, her grip tightening on her books. "I am sorry about that." Adil couldn't help but feel guilty at Tally's words. He had, after all, had a hand in helping her to think she was imagining things. Tally's eyes widened at his words. "Oh no! I mean, That's okay, she shook her head. I totally get why you didn't say anything, and it was really nice of you to teach her that working, so that she can still go outside unnoticed. Adil almost laughed at that, his eyes crinkling with mirth. I think Khalida was ready to end me when she found out what I had done, but I couldn't imagine being hidden away somewhere with no idea of when you'll be able to reveal yourself to the world. I'm still not entirely sure what you will do with it after all is said and done, but it felt like the right thing to do at the time. Well, she's definitely grateful for it. And besides, can you imagine Alder getting cabin fever? I'm pretty sure there would be a never-ending storm over Fort Salem. Adil smiled at Tally with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. So, are you going to see her again? Tally almost seemed to blush at Adil's question. She said I could go and visit her any time I wanted, but I'm not sure if she was just saying that to be nice or not. Adil did crack a smile at that. When does Alder ever say things to just be nice? Fair point. Tally was properly blushing now, a red flush crawling up her cheeks. Her skin prickled from the heat. I just don't want to annoy her. Tally, Adil was still smiling. You're one of 6 people in the whole world who know that she is alive. And I'm pretty sure you're in the half that includes people that she actually likes. If she says that you can visit her whenever you want, then you can probably visit her whenever you want. Tally bit her lip in a failed attempt to hide the smile on her face. Yeah, I guess you're right. Well, hey, Adil said, knocking her gently on the shoulder as he walked by her on the way out of the room. There's only one way to find out. Keeping the secret of Alder's existence from her sisters had been surprisingly easier than she thought it was going to be. Neither of them seemed to be willing to bring her up as a topic of conversation, probably out of fear of upsetting Tally, and Tally found herself being grateful for that. She spent a few restless nights, unsure of when or if she would go to see Alder next, and even if Abigail and Rael, occasionally misinterpreting that restlessness as her missing Alder, would sleepily murmur reassurances at her and tell her to go back to sleep, Tally was fine with them being unaware of her true turmoil, as long as it didn't progress any further than that. In the end, Tally only ended up waiting 3 days before she decided to go visit Alder again. Part of it was because she was curious if Alder had actually meant the whenever you want thing, but the other part was simply because she needed to see Alder again. She needed to make sure the woman was actually alive, actually safe. It was a Saturday afternoon when she finally decided to stop agonizing over whether or not she should visit and just go through with it. Rael was spending the day in Scylla's dorm, probably in Scylla's bed, and with Abigail off somewhere with Adil, Tally figured it was her best chance to visit Alder unnoticed. She retraced the steps that she had taken the other night with Anacostia, quickly and quietly making her way to the tool shed that hid Alder's safe house. Tally's heart was thundering in her chest as she walked through the door to the shed and pulled it closed behind her, her stomach a bundle of nerves. She reached out for the handle to the door that was hidden in the back of the shed and— "Fuck," she whispered under her breath. The door was still hidden, and would remain hidden because, Tally realized with a sinking heart, she didn't know the sea to reveal it. She stood there, frozen in place for a solid minute, staring at the back of the tool shed, hoping the door would appear. The back wall, frustratingly, remained a back wall, and Tally swore under her breath again. She could go find Anacostia and ask her to teach her the seed, but Tally had no idea where Anacostia was today. Petra could also teach her, but somehow Tally doubted that Petra would be willing to give up that information so easily. Isadora was another option, but then again, Just because Isadora knew that Alder was alive didn't mean she knew where she was being kept or how to access the safe house. Tally sighed angrily, blinking back tears of frustration. Her best bet would be to go find Anacostia, wherever the hell she was, and hope that she had enough free time to teach Tally the seed. Tally turned to go, grabbing the handle to the front door of the shed, when a scraping noise from behind her caught her attention. Tally whirled back around, a noise of surprise leaving her mouth at the back wall, which was no longer just a back wall, but a door, which was opening. A flutter of nerves erupted in her chest as the door swung open to reveal Alder, who tilted her head at Tally in confusion. "Were you just going to stand up here all day?" Tally flushed, looking down. "I didn't know the seed to get the door to appear." She chanced to look up at Alder again, who was still looking at her. Tally didn't think she would ever get used to the sight of Alder with her hair down. She had seen it once, when she had burst into her office late at night to demand answers about Nick de Batan, and again, just the last time she had spoken to Alder. There was also the Alder from her delusion given to her by Nicta that had her hair down, but Tally very desperately did her best to dissociate that Alder from the real Alder, the Alder that was currently still looking at her, a slightly concerned look on her face. It took Tally a second to realize that while she had been thinking about the woman's hair, Alder had probably said something to her. Her flush grew darker. "Sorry, what?" "I asked if you wanted to come downstairs. I can teach you that seed before you leave. That way you can just come right down next time." Alder opened the door further and stepped aside, motioning for Tally to head down the stairs. Tally nodded quickly, unable to say anything of any real value as she scooted past Alder, who closed the door behind them, humming something low in her throat to hide the door once more. Tally could feel Alder behind her as she walked down the stairs, and once she reached the bottom, without really thinking, she reached out and grabbed the door handle, turning it. It clicked uselessly in her hand. "You've got a lot of locks," she said lamely, fighting back another blush. She didn't need to look at Alder to know she was smirking. Alder reached around her, gently nudging her hand away from the doorknob to trace a sigil over it, her other hand hovering over the small of Tally's back. Tally suddenly found it hard to swallow as she felt Alder's fingertips brush over her back, her long hair tickling Tally's arm. All too soon the sigil was traced, and Alder twisted the knob, opening the door for Tally to step into. "Remind me to teach you that sigil too," was all she said. Tally nodded breathlessly as she stepped into the small safe house, the door shutting behind them both. Alder stepped around her, walking over to the small living room. Like last time, a fire was roaring in the fireplace, and a book was resting on the coffee table, accompanied by a bottle of whiskey and an almost empty glass next to it. Tally glanced back at the door, a thought occurring to her. "How did you know I was up there?" Alder, who had been reaching for the whiskey bottle, froze. "What?" "Well, I had only been up there a few minutes. I was just getting ready to leave when you opened the door. How did you know I was up there?" Alder looked at her curiously, the bottle of whiskey now forgotten. "Well, I could feel you up there. Do you not—" she tilted her head. "Do you not feel that too?" Tally's stomach fluttered. "Feel what?" she whispered. Alder suddenly looked away from her, almost as if she were embarrassed. "I can sense you whenever you're close. A remnant of the Biddy bond, if I had to guess. There are fragments of emotions with it as well, nothing overly strong or specific, but but sometimes I can feel a foreign emotion, one that belongs to you and not me. Not often, but it does happen. I had assumed that it went both ways." "Oh," Tally breathed out. "I didn't know what that was." Alder looked back at her with that. "I don't think I've ever felt any of your emotions, not that I've noticed. But I have definitely felt you. It's how I knew that the working that I was seeing was you. It was like I could sense you near me." If Tally didn't know any better, she would have said that Alder looked almost relieved at that. "You haven't been having any more dreams, have you?" she asked carefully. "No, not since—" Tally cut herself off, swallowing harshly. The words, "not since you died," hung in the air around them, not needing to be spoken. "I see," Alder said softly. "Well, hopefully it remains that way." She turned her attention back to her whiskey, picking up the bottle and pouring some more into her glass. "Whiskey? Oh, no thank you. I don't actually like whiskey." Alder arched an eyebrow at her. "You wound me, Craven," she said in an almost mocking tone, "and here I thought we were going to get along." Tally flushed, but before she could say anything, Alder was crossing the living room to the kitchen. "Would some wine suit you better? I only have red, no white." "Yes, that's fine." Tally couldn't help it as her eyes followed Alder across the room. The last time she had seen Alder, she was so focused on the woman herself, the fact that she was alive, she hadn't given herself much of a chance to realize that Alder was wearing civilian clothing. She didn't even think Alder had owned any civilian clothing, but then again, maybe she hadn't before all of this. She wanted to go out and profusely thank whoever had provided Alder with her current set of clothes, because Tally was almost certain she hadn't seen anything better looking. The clothes themselves weren't even that remarkable. A plain navy blue t-shirt with a V collar, and jeans that seemed to fit her just a little too well. Oh goddess, Tally realized with a pang of adoration, she was wearing moccasins. On any other woman, Tally wouldn't have looked twice, but as Alder disappeared into the kitchen and could be heard rummaging around for some glasses, Tally realized with a jolt to her chest that Alder was definitely not just any woman, and her secret that had been buried so deep into her chest began to stir again, catching her off guard by the sudden severity of it. She was still in love with Sarah Alder. Alder was true to her word, and at the end of her visit taught Tally both the seed song to reveal the hidden door and the sigil needed to unlock the door to the actual safe house. She had grabbed Tally by the wrist, tracing the symbol in the palm of the girl's hand. Tally, doing her best not to shiver or gasp or have any other reaction that would let Alder on to just how much her touch affected Tally. Tally turned to go, opening the door to the staircase, when suddenly Alder's hand was on her again, softly grasping her by her elbow. Tally turned, looking up to meet blue eyes that were looking at her almost desperately. "Come back tomorrow," Alder said, her voice almost as soft as her touch. "If you're able to, that is. But you don't need to wait 3 days between visits, Tally. I don't think I want that any more than you do." Tally's eyes widened slightly. "I can come back tomorrow," she said almost immediately, cursing herself for how quickly she had answered. Alder's small smile was worth it, though, as she dropped a hand from Tally's elbow. "Good. Anacostia and Isadora do visit, but they're both incredibly busy. It's never as often as I would like. I hope it will be different with you." A pang of guilt went through Tally's chest. She had been so preoccupied the past few days about whether or not Alder was being sincere when she told her to visit, that she didn't stop to truly think about Alder's situation. She was essentially trapped down here in this house, and even when she could get outside to walk around, she still couldn't talk to anybody. Alder tilted her head curiously. "What's wrong? I feel like I should have come to visit you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." "Ah," Alder smiled at her, shaking her head. "Don't feel bad about that. I'm just glad you came at all." "Me too." Tally could feel a blush creeping up her face. "Thank you for trusting me with the keys to get in here." She motioned to the door in front of her. "I should get going, but I'll be back tomorrow. I promise." Alder nodded, still smiling at her. "Goodbye, Tally. I'll see you tomorrow."
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.